we have two amazing investors from Notable, Chelsea and Dan. Please come up. Notable is an amazing firm. It's been around for 24 years.
Yeah.
24.
How many of you have a company called Slack? Airbnb? What are the other big hitters?
We have Glenn here, who's on the board of HashiCorp. Oh, sorry, can you hear me? Vercel, quite a few others. So lucky to be involved with some good companies.
So they have a ton of experience, and so Dan and Chelsea have been really focused on investing in AI. Dan on the infrastructure side and Chelsea on the application side. And they're going to teach you all the tactical tips for how to raise a VC round for AI.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's start. So the two of you are sharing a microphone.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we got this.
Let's start with this one. Imagine you are a founder. You don't know any VCs. You're about to go out to raise. And you're like, I don't know anyone who can introduce me. I need to reach out cold. What do you do?
That is a good question. Look, I think the SF community being back is super helpful here because VCs like us like to go to events like this and get to know people. And I think a lot of VCs are just trying to get to know people in person. And so I think just going around, going to events, trying to meet people, trying to see who you have a good connection with is helpful. Beyond that, we get a decent amount of cold outreach. I would say 99% of that doesn't seem like a whole lot of thought goes into it. And so I think differentiating from that sort of pool is easier than you might think. Even simple things like, look up what deals an investor has been involved in or what things they've written about and try to sort of tailor outreach to people who you think are relevant. I think that's always helpful, and I think you'd be surprised, I don't know about you, Chelsea, I probably get 5 or 6 cold inbounds a day. I probably get maybe one a quarter that has that level of thought put into it. So the bar might not be as high as you think on those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Dan. I think obviously cold outreach feels like it's an abyss, like who's going to read it? But I actually don't think it has to be that way. Like you said, being really specific and kind of having a direct ask. So if a lot of times you'll get outreach and it's unclear, you're like, are you actually raising? Are you just wanting to tell me about your company? Are you just sending this as marketing information? So I think being really specific of I would love to talk to you for this amount of time to discuss X, makes it a little bit more actionable for the investor to answer. I think the other thing is, as Dan said, community is so important in venture as a founder. And so I would heavily lean on building your founder network. So coming to things like this, even though VCs are here, over-index on just meeting other founders who you think are really awesome, because the amount of inbound or kind of leads that I get often come from the founders in my network. So also build your own founder community, the things that Jam has done here and kind of bringing you all together. You have the autonomy and the ability to do that too. And then other founders are oh, this person's amazing. They know how to build community. You know what? I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to connect them to my investor or someone I think is relevant.
Okay, so I'm going to go mic-less because their answers I think are more important for you to hear. Prioritizing the mics. So you go to events, you meet other founders, you build your founder community, you meet VCs, and you send good cold emails. Just to hone it in, can the two of you sort of improv right now? What is an amazing cold email? If everyone here goes home and writes a cold email to a VC tonight, what are the words that they should use?
Okay, I am not an improv for a reason. This is why I'm an investor. But I think in short, it would be something along the lines of Chelsea, looked at your previous investments in X, Y, and Z, also saw that you wrote a piece of content on Y, thought that was really interesting for Z reason. I'm building this company that does this thing and I'm raising. Do you have 20 minutes to talk and attach a deck? The end. Again, not suggesting that's always going to yield a result, but to me that illustrates one, you didn't just spam email 50 investors, which by the way, your time is valuable and I get that. So I don't mean to suggest you need to spend all of your time, but it does make me feel you've put in thought, what I'm interested in. You could probably figure out I'm interested in what you're building. And then you're saying this set amount of time can you meet? So sorry, that's probably very obvious, but that's how I would do it.
Yeah, I would say the only thing I would add is maybe a little bit on your background, why you think you're relevant to building a company. And I think that giving people a bit of a carrot on hey, we signed this customer last week, or we grew X amount in the last month is always good, because VCs to some extent are driven by FOMO, and if they see that in the email and they see like, oh, maybe there's something really interesting here, they're much more likely to kind of take that time.
So can you just improv what a great cold email to you with those things might?
I guess to me specifically, I recently wrote an article on serverless software. We've done a lot of investing there. If someone reached out and said, hey, I saw your investor in Vercel and Neon and Ingest. I've been building something very interesting, serverless software. We see a lot of customers that use those tools also flock to our product. And we added, 100 users last week and 50 users the week before. And we're raising a seed round. Would love to chat with you about it. I think you're probably getting a 100% email response rate.
Wow. Notice how short both those improv emails were. I think that's really key. So one of the things that's really tricky for founders is we're over here trying to pitch our startups, but there's this whole other conversation happening in VC world about what's investable in AI right now, what's not investable in AI right now. Like, where are incumbents going to win? Where are they not going to win? What's the narrative happening right now in VC partner meetings around AI startups?
I mean, I think we're at a point where there's kind of consensus that AI is a big platform shift, and people want to deploy dollars against that. I think what folks want to understand is, what's real and what's kind of marketing speak. Like, what's a product that folks are going to use at scale and that isn't going to be obviated by, some open AI release, and what's something that can just come and go. Every VC is going to have a different perspective on this, and I think that it's hard to give like hard and fast rules on what people are talking about. Ultimately, I think that the things that drive at least our thinking are talking to people at various stages in the market. So, if you get 10 seed stage AI companies to use your AI infrastructure product, that's amazing, and that's really hard. But that doesn't always give us validation that, at some point an enterprise is going to use this. And so I think seeing some kind of diversification around there is a good signal to us. I think just seeing like raw usage is a good signal. Like, I think some people try to outsmart the market. At the end of the day, like, people using things and paying for things means a lot. And you can sit here and like have big ideas on what's going to win and what isn't, but oftentimes the market proves you wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dan described it pretty well. I guess the only thing I'd add is I think there were obviously early conversations, maybe like early last year, around like everything being a GPT wrapper and no one's going to like invest in that and that's not relevant. I think luckily we have moved past kind of that thinking, and I think a lot of folks, I say this a lot, but I think a lot of infrastructure remains a very critical piece of the AI puzzle, but I think there is a lot more momentum and excitement about the application layer. It's still very early, but I think you're probably seeing the articles of like 2024 is the year of the AI app, or like all of these investors saying that. So I'd say like if you are an AI app builder, maybe it felt like it was a cold market previously, but I think a lot of investors are starting to understand there are ways to differentiate yourself on the app layer. And I think something Dan said that's really critical that I think about when I'm investing in these companies is I spend a lot of my time talking to enterprises to understand like what is their actual readiness for adoption. And I'd actually argue that, again, it's a very different seat that you all are sitting in as builders than I am, but when I engage with founders who are also similarly doing that deep research and diligence around like, what do enterprise buyers even care about and think about? It gives me some validation that like, hey, you're like hunting for the right problem and building a solution that actually solves a real problem. So just as you think about those things, I think it's a great way to like build rapport with investors. It's like, hey, I've talked to enterprises as well.
Talk about GPT wrapper, and if you're pitching to a VC and they say something GPT wrapper, how should you as a founder respond?
Well, I have actually never said that to a founder, so I feel like if an investor says that to you, I hope most investors don't say that. It would be my guess at this point, because I think a lot of founders have gotten really smart about how they're leveraging LLMs to actually build their applications. But I think if you do get that response, I think obviously one thing you can talk about is like, what is the differentiation around your data moat? I spend a lot of time investing in vertical AI applications. I led an investment in a company called Arteria that's based in Toronto. I'm actually flying there after this to meet with them. But in short, like, they are model agnostic and they help major financial institutions ingest long form contracts. And their response was like, we understand this really specific piece of this really specific enterprise's challenges and pain points. And so in theory, you could maybe argue it's a GPT wrapper, but when you dig under the hood, it's a lot more complex and the workflow is a lot more interesting. I think that's another critical piece. Is like, I think there was so much obsession on like, what's the tech? But I think we're moving to the place where it's like model plus workflow. And like, that's the really interesting thing that you can differentiate yourself. I'll speak for the app side on what you can differentiate yourself.
Yeah, I would say it's important to just be upfront with people. Like if someone believes that anything that calls an OpenAI API is not investable and that's what you're building, they're probably not going to invest in your company. And like, there's not much you can say that's probably going to change that. I think that if your belief is that you can build, a really interesting workflow that calls an OpenAI API and that, the moat in the business comes around everything else and your ability to reach a certain user and provide value to them, then, that's how you should pitch the company. And if, there are going to be people out there who are going to want to invest in that. If there's compelling proof points and traction, and you can tell a good story around it. But there's also probably going to be people out there who believe that they only want to invest in something that is a proprietary model, and you're probably not going to change their mind.
One note, just as a person who now works with VCs, after they invest, you continue to work with them. So it's probably important that you get along, you see the world the same way, that you like working together. And so if to Dan's point, if that's just not their jam, probably the conversation should just end there. Okay, talking to a lot of AI founder friends, they're hearing from VCs, oh yeah, I've seen a lot of these. And the truth is, AI is very crowded. There's a lot of people trying to build something. And the most interesting things to build, a lot of people are trying to build them. How should a founder answer such a question? Oh, I've seen a lot of these.
Look, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's a question that folks, I'm sure, ask themselves as they build companies. Like, one, why am I the right person to build this company? And two, why is my product going to be different? And maybe I'd add three, like, how am I going to reach customers before my competitors do? And so I think just having tight answers around that is important. So understanding sort of why you're the right person to build this, having a real strong point of view on what can you build or how can you go to market in a way that other people can. And just explaining that with some level of detail, I think matters a lot. Like, look, there are some people who are going to say like, oh, this is an important category. I just want to bet on good people in the category. But I think that at least for your own kind of internal conviction, like answering some of those questions is pretty critical.
Yeah, I would only add that I think also being proactive and understanding that it's a competitive landscape. I think a challenge I can have sometimes in meetings with founders is you say, okay, like what's the competitive landscape? And people say, oh, none, or very few. And you're, as an investor who looks at this, you're thinking, no, my job is to meet all of you. So I know there's more than just you building this. And so I actually think being proactive in your response and actually saying like, yep, I know this is crowded. And as Dan said, use all of the reasons as to why you're different is actually a really like powerful posture to have versus trying to suggest that there are no competitors, because we all know that there are.
The two of you meet, I mean, you've probably talked to hundreds of AI founders pitching. What are the top 3 mistakes AI founders make when they go to pitch?
Maybe we can like popcorn this one.
Yeah,
I think
go for
one is probably not being transparent on how the company's actually built. So maybe suggesting that you have like a proprietary or specialized model and then you dig under the hood and it's actually just utilizing OpenAI or Anthropic, which is also totally fine. We back companies that do that. But I think that sometimes that can feel a bit confusing as an investor because you thought it was one thing and obviously it's different. I think just being really transparent about like how you're building the company and also saying like, hey, the future may look different, but this is what we're doing today for these reasons.
Yeah, I'd say one big pet peeve of mine is the sort of field of dreams go-to-market approach of we're going to build something amazing and then all the users are going to come. That sometimes happens. It usually doesn't happen. And so I think that, having some thoughts, even if it's early, on how do I get this into the hands of users and eventually how do I get people to pay for it is helpful beyond, you might have built the best product in the world, but there, I think, usually has to be at least a little bit of direction there.
I'd also say being really open with, or I guess I'm changing it to more of a positive thing versus like what's the pet peeve, but something that you can do as well is like do the research on the person you're talking to, because oftentimes we'll say, especially at the early stage, like, what do you need help with? Like, what are you looking for in a partner? Like, what do you think are gaps in your business? And founders like not having any idea is usually difficult to understand, because you're like, okay, you have this opportunity to tell me like this huge plan of what you need and how someone can be valuable. So I'd say having some sense of that. Often answers are things like go to market, things like we need to hire engineering talent because we've been really lean, that's why I'm raising, like being prepared to kind of answer those questions.
So those are oh, Glenn.
I just wanted to add one thing to something that was said earlier around competition. I think one thing any founder should realize when you go talk to a VC is that if that VC is going to take you seriously, they're going to talk to all your competitors as well. And so it's actually smart and good practice to be proactive. Know who your competitors are. Bring that to the meeting. Show people, hey, here's why we're different. But show that you're knowledgeable about your competitors. That'll make a VC feel like, okay, this person is savvy. I can trust that they understand they're in a competitive market and they want to win. If you come in and you just hope the VC isn't going to talk to that competitor that's actually ahead of you, that's a naive strategy that won't yield good results.
That's amazing advice. This is Glenn, who's on the GM board and invested as part of the Series A. We get wise advice like this all the time. We're so lucky.
She's like,
so those are the top mistakes founders make when they go out to pitch. What about the opposite? What are the 3 things the best founders do when they pitch their AI startup?
I think they're very clear about the problem that they're trying to solve, which again sounds very simplistic. And again, it doesn't have to stay the same. So I'd like to caveat this by saying like the best part or what I love about my job is like I can remain super curious. It's so dynamic. And I imagine that's why many of you are founders. It's like this is not the day job where you just do the same thing every day. So like one, coming in with like a clear understanding, like this is the problem I want to solve, but obviously remaining nimble and being willing to pivot. But I say that's probably something that great founders do is like say like, hey, I'm solving this problem. I validated it for these reasons and I'm going to go after it.
I think particularly in the infrastructure space, people being thoughtful on who's adopting my product and how matters a lot. Like most infrastructure products you need to integrate in some capacity. Sometimes that's easier, sometimes that's harder. Sometimes you need to loop in a bunch of different people from a bunch of different teams. Sometimes an individual developer can do it. So I think having thoughts on how do you design a product that is conducive to rapid adoption. And look, some things are very difficult to adopt, like databases are difficult to adopt. And so having a strategy that sort of is aligned with that makes a very good impression, at least on me.
I guess if I were to add a third thing, we've talked about this a lot, but go-to-market matters obviously a ton. An idea is only as good as the people who want to actually purchase it. And so I would say, I don't think you need to have like your full go-to-market strategy scoped at the seed. Absolutely, like, that's not necessarily the expectation, but it is really, as Dan already said, really helpful to have a founder or a team who has some understanding of like what if you were going enterprise, like what that go-to-market motion looks like even doing some high level, back of the envelope, like how many AEs do I need potentially? Like what does that actually mean? So if I'm at the seed stage and it's just founder-led sales, like when do I need to start pivoting and turning on that sales engine? Like those kind of things illustrate to the VC that you're thinking ahead and you understand that to be a venture scale business, you have to really put a team around go-to-market to some extent. But there's obviously businesses that are PLG, like whatever your model is, having that foresight or thinking 3-4 steps ahead is helpful.
It's really tough. How many of you here in this room are founders with a product designer engineering background, not a go-to-market background? It's most of the room. So what would a good answer if a VC asks, what is your plan for go-to-market? Could you improv? What does like a good answer kind of sound like?
What's improv?
I can give it a shot, but I think that let's say you're someone who doesn't have extensive go-to-market experience. I think starting by talking to, hey, we've spoken to X number of customers. What we've learned is that, we need to reach this buyer. Let's say it's an enterprise company. We need to reach this buyer. We've tested, a couple outreach methods. We found that these ones seem to work for at least getting to the initial, first, call it dozen or 50 customers. We think that this is kind of the pitch that resonates with them and how they justify it to their broader org. We think this is how quickly we can sort of reach them and adopt them. Obviously, all of these things are big assumptions that we're making, but based on that, that's how we want to sort of approach things for the first 5 or 6 months. Surround ourselves with good partners, surround ourselves with VCs who can introduce us to folks who have seen this movie before, and then iterate from there on how we reach people, who we reach, how we should think about building a broader team, and go from there. I mean, I think it's very much okay. Like, I would rather hear from folks that they don't have all the answers than people try to kind of BS their way through it. Like, ultimately, as Dani can probably speak to, your job as a founder changes very rapidly, and people being willing to embrace that change is something that folks try to assess, as they're thinking about investing in a company.
That was such a good answer. I would back that company.
I agree. I don't think I can top that. I thought it was really comprehensive, frankly.
What I thought was so good about it is it provided a framework, and it was very short. So it showed you had done the research, you were thinking about it in a structured way, you seemed in control, and it was also concise, and then added at the end that this is our short-term plan for like 5 to 6 months, and then it will change. I just thought it was stellar.
Thank you. I listened to a lot of these. So.
We are going to do something that I'm really excited about. When all of you registered, you gave us your most pressing VC assumption, VC myth, that you wanted us to either confirm or debunk. And we took the ones that appeared the most often, and we have them here. And I've got for each of you some paper and markers. And we're going to put one myth up at a time.
Okay. Thank you.
And the two of you are going to write down true or false, but don't show, and then we're going to show it together. You ready?
I think I turned mine on. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Please excuse my terrible handwriting in advance.
So the first myth is that VC funding, even for AI, is dry in 2024. While they're writing, how many of this room think true? And who thinks false? You ready? The big reveal?
Sorry,
what
I'm
do
not.
we mean by dry?
Yeah.
It's just very, very challenging.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right.
Bad market. 1, 2, 3. Discuss?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously you guys have all heard about kind of the recorrection in the VC market, funding slowing down. We've probably all seen the PitchBook or Crunchbase charts around kind of capital deployed. And I don't think that that's obviously real. Funding has kind of normalized, but I would say particularly in AI, there's a lot of interest in finding and working with really talented people. I think as Dan said, kind of underpinning that is like a widespread belief that AI is going to transform the software ecosystem. So whenever folks kind of rally behind an idea like that, it's safe to say that there's going to be a lot of capital deployed. I think if anything, the shift that I've seen, especially around AI, is things, I'll let Dan speak about kind of the infrastructure landscape. I'll talk on the app side. Things are, I guess I would say, more prolonged in terms of processes. I think you probably heard in 2023 or even 22, things like Harvey or like Jasper, like kind of earlier kind of like Gen AI startups getting funded super quickly at really high, wild multiples per se. I would actually say on the app side, funding is still happening, but it's actually just a longer process, and that like folks are really getting to know each other. We're diving into the numbers. We're talking about product strategy. We're meeting your team. We're introing you to customers. So I think that's a great shift if you're building on the AI app side, because you actually get to know. It's a marriage, right? Like if you're going to take VC funding, so you want to know your funder as well as I want to know any one of you.
Yeah, I'd say on the infrastructure side, the market is hot, sometimes frustratingly so for Glenn and I. So we do see deals happening quickly. We do see deals happening at relatively high prices. I would say that, every VC, I would venture to guess, has told their LPs that we're going to invest in AI. I would be curious to see what the opposite conversation would look like. On the flip side, and I think why maybe it sometimes doesn't feel this way, is there's a lot of companies out there. There's a lot of people building companies, and I think altogether that's a really good thing for the ecosystem. But as sort of the demand for AI companies goes up, it seems like the supply is going up as well.
Yep. Okay, next myth. You need an AI angle to raise funding in 2024. Who in this room thinks true? Who in this room thinks false? The suspense. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Any discussion needed, or we're all in agreement?
I think we're all in.
Okay.
We can talk after, I suppose, if you want to, but I think it's fine.
For early AI founders, you need a technical co-founder to raise VC. Who in this room thinks true? Who in this room thinks false? Ready? 1,
That's a good one.
2. Or are you still thinking, Chelsea?
No, I can be ready.
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
I would go with the depends.
I
but,
know, it's tough.
Say more.
I don't think we would back like an infrastructure product that sells to technical folks that doesn't have a technical co-founder. Look, if you're, I'll let Chelsea speak to maybe the rest of the market or like the consumer market, but I could certainly venture to guess there are areas where, your core differentiation isn't on like true AI, and there's room in the market for that.
Yeah, the reason I was kind of in a maybe, but I ultimately said true, is I just think given the pace of change in AI, even if you're building in a vertical or a category where like quote unquote the technology is not like the reason you win, I would want you to have a technical co-founder that could help you kind of navigate through the various changes. But I wouldn't say it's a deal breaker. I would say, yeah, we could talk about it.
Awesome. Next myth. For early AI founders, you need to have a product to raise VC in 2024. Who in this room thinks true? False? And the investors? False. Tell us more.
I guess, sorry, it's still on? No. I think with every deal, like there are going to be your pluses and minuses, and sometimes your pluses are so big that the minuses don't matter. Like, look, if Elon Musk wants to raise a seed round, he's going to do it, And so there are folks who people are willing to back on just them and no idea. There's folks that people are willing to back on them plus an idea. And, I think if you have less of a track record, which is totally fine, plenty of amazing companies have been built with people with little to no track record, then people are going to want to see more in terms of, your ability to execute on product. We've backed companies we backed a company called Dscope, which was founded by folks who had sold their last company to Palo Alto Networks for $650 million. And they were building another security company. And we didn't need validation that they could build a good security product. But if you hadn't done that before, then the conversation's probably a little bit different.
Yeah, I think Dan said it really well. I think it's your unique background that probably gives you the right to potentially raise without a product. But I think there's a lot of investors, including ourselves, that are in market to meet people like this who have a really differentiated and unique background. So if you have if you've been building an AI for years at any of the hyperscalers, or say you've been a researcher, or you just know a category extremely well, like those are things, like we said, in your cold outreach you can include. But generally, when you're pitching a VC, like you definitely want to highlight those things because it'll definitely change the direction of the conversation, particularly if you're walking in without a product.
Yeah. What about, do you need to have revenue to raise VC in 2024? Who in this room thinks true? False? And the investors? False.
Yeah.
Okay. For early AI founders, you can't raise VC unless you worked at a FAANG company or went to a top-tier university. Who in this room thinks true? False? And? VCs won't back your AI startup unless you move to San Francisco. Who in this room thinks true? False? And?
Sorry.
We're really debunking some myths. This is the last one. Did anyone see this on Twitter? This went super viral a couple of days ago. where a VC said, financial models are back, even for pre-seed. And 1 million people saw it, and it sparked the whole internet debated. Who in this room thinks true? At pre-seed, you need to have a financial model in order to raise VC. Who thinks false? You definitely do not. And?
Yeah, I think.
I would say this got a little bit more hate than I thought it deserved. Like, I don't think you need to have a financial model. I do think it's a good idea if you raise money to have at least an idea of where you're going to spend it. Like having no answer on that is, maybe problematic. I think the other thing, like at a minimum, if you're planning to make revenue, like the 2 questions I ask is how many customers and what are they going to pay you? Yeah. And I don't think those are those can also be assumptions, but I would be prepared to answer those 2 questions.
I agree.
Awesome. Amazing. Give it up for Dan and Chelsea, and thank you.